Hi, this is Zach with Worn & Wound, and today I'll be taking a look at the Nodus Contrail and Contrail 39. So Nodus is a pretty young brand. This is their third release, I believe. They're based in Los Angeles, where they design their watches, they assemble their watches. They also do some in-house regulation on their movements that they use in LA. And since kind of getting a start a few years ago, they've definitely built a nice audience for themselves, a nice fan base. And their new release, the Contrail, has gotten quite a bit of fanfare. So I was excited to take a look. It's also, just on a personal level, I think the one that has appealed to me most. It's a kind of all-purpose sport watch, travel watch. So it's not specifically a diver, it's not specifically a pilot, and that was definitely their intention, was to create something that would be, good from sea, land, air, but then also just have this kind of concept of like travel in mind. So there's two versions of it. There's the Contrail, which has this 12-hour bezel here, which is fantastic for traveling, and then there is the Contrail 39, which is a bezel-free version, which has a little bit more of kind of a classic dress sport watch, an everyday tool watch, kind of a look to it. And we'll take kind of a look at both of them. This one is 39 millimeters because it lacks the bezel, whereas this one's a little bit larger at 40.5 millimeters. But they basically both use the same base case structure, and then it's really the bezel that kind of changes things. So let's just get right into that case. It's a very nice case from the start. I think it's really nicely sized, really nicely proportioned. They definitely were looking at sort of classic watches. I mean, one watch that they say themselves on their website that they were really interested in is actually the Sin 104, which I think you can kind of conceptually see some similarities to here. It's sort of this everyday pilot watch sort of a thing, but it has a higher water resistance. So these watches are 200-meter water resistant watches. But then you have some of these kind of classically inspired elements to it, applied numerals. I think this bezel has a definite kind of vintage feel to it. So they're playing off of a nice range of aesthetics, and yet created a very contemporary watch. So once again, just looking at this case, it's a 39 millimeter case, 40.5 at the bezel. It is 47 millimeters lug to lug. It's got a 20 millimeter lug width here. It's 13 millimeters tall, and that includes this sapphire crystal here, which you might be able to see kind of stands up above the bezel on both of the versions just a little bit, giving it a touch of that kind of vintage box acrylic sapphire look to it. Some standout features on this case are, I'd actually say the finishing on this. So these watches, are relatively affordable, $599 with the bezel, $575 without the bezel. So, that puts it, well into the affordable category. So, some things that might get missed at that price point would be finishing, but they really focused on finishing, which I have to say was really great to see. So you have chamfering along the edges of this case here, which with a polish. You have nice brushing along the edge of the case. You have nice brushing on the top of the case, which is radial brushing, so it kind of follows a line around. Looking at the steel bezel model, you have here a polished bevel along the edge of this wide steel bezel, and then you have kind of sunburst brushing on that bezel coming out from the center. So really nice play and finishing there, and I think when you kind of catch the light along the edge here, the play of the different finishes, it really pops, it really stands out. So I think that's a really nice feature. It definitely goes with that kind of this being an everyday watch, not just like a rugged tool watch, but having some sort of I don't want to say formal, but classical elements to them. Drilled lugs as well, always a plus, something we love to see. Looking at the crown and the crown guard here, you have a knurled crown, which has a very nice texture to it, screws down. Crown guards, subtle crown guards, they're not too much. I think they do a nice job. If for nothing else, actually, there's a bit of a long crown, so by kind of covering it, I think it's going to make it a little bit more comfortable on the wrist as well, which I think was a good decision on their part. Case back, it's a solid case back. You have some planes flying here. It's just a nice simple design, obviously Contrail, kind of shown here, just well executed. Getting back to the bezel model, the bezel's really exciting. So I have to say they did, once again, an exceptional job on this, and something that really stands out on a $599 watch. This is a sapphire bezel insert with a base level under there that has lumed typography. We'll show you actually the lume in a minute. It is a 60-click bi-directional bezel with a ball bearing mechanism rather than your standard click. That's definitely like a more expensive, or at least a higher end bezel mechanism. From what I've seen, you just don't typically see ball bearing mechanisms at this price point. It's a very sure click. It lands really right on the spot, which is fantastic. It's also cool that they did the bi-directional bezel, because that is definitely what it should be, frankly, for this concept of the kind of travel GMT. Often, and they point this out, people just retrofit a dive bezel, which would be a unidirectional bezel with this kind of insert, but here they wanted to go both ways, which just conceptually makes sense, makes it, I think it is a better thought out watch. Also with this bezel, it's a very tall bezel with a really, really nice grip on the side. Once again, it's this knurling. It's really well finished, really well executed, feels great on your fingers. I just like that they did that. I like that it plays with the crown. It's just a smart design there. Getting into the dial now, there's a nice play here of different elements, vintage and kind of contemporary. So it's pretty straightforward. You have a surface with applied indices on there. The indices have little points on them. There's lume on them, C3 lume, doubling at 12, so you always have that orientation. Date window at 3, excuse me. But what they played with was the coloring. So this one is what they call ballistic green. And I love that. I think it's a really cool color. I think they chose just the right tone for it so that it's a very wearable green. And to me, that adds a very kind of contemporary bend to this watch. I don't think you'd see that kind of coloration on something vintage. I think it's a touch playful. It's a touch more modern. And I think it was a good choice. There are 4 colors, so they're not all green. Obviously, we have black sand. Here is what they call it. The reason they actually call this sand is because there's a bit of a texture to the dial, which is interesting. I have to say I'm not 100% sure where I lie on that, if I personally like it. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just kind of a funky texture. I'm kind of just not 100% sure where I stand on that. Looking now again at the dial, one nice detail is that around the edge of the green, there is another layer which has this kind of medium gray ring. Once again, that's kind of an interesting move. I don't think I've seen a dial executed like that. I like how it frames things. I like how the applied markers go across both. It just adds a level of interest. There's a slightly different finish to that too. It's got a touch of gloss to it. So it just adds kind of another dimension to the design. There's then a chapter ring around the outside, which has printing that's almost like vertical. So on there, you have your second minute index, and there's white lines per second, numerals per 5 minutes or seconds, and then actually sub-seconds in a gray. It's a little hard to see. Obviously, that's not the most necessary measurement to have, so it kind of recedes from the vision, but it's there. It adds a little bit of texture to that. I really love seeing a very vertical chapter ring used still graphically. I think that's a smart thing to do. It doesn't feel like it's a wasted piece. That totally could have been left black on, and you wouldn't really even think about it, but they engaged it here, which I think was a smart move. And then you get out to the bezel. So obviously, if you leave that at origin, you're going to have your 12-hour indices. So you just have a whole complete watch here, straightforward, simple, or a whole complete dial with everything you'd ever want. And then obviously you shift it and you're in another time zone. Super easy. If I were to gripe on one thing about this dial, it would be the date window. And it's not that I don't like that there is a date window. They even say when traveling, obviously the date is important. And having just come back from a trip and getting confused about what day it was a few times, I have to agree with them on that. It's the metal window around it. I feel like that just looks a little bit under-finessed compared to everything else. Don't know what another solution would have been necessarily offhand, but it's the one thing that feels just a little bit off to me. Not enough to take away from this fully. I think this is actually a really wonderfully executed dial, super legible, but it just stands out a little bit to me. One thing I actually really love about this also is the lume is fantastic. So it's C3 lume, which gives you that kind of greenish tint when it's not glowing. And we're going to light it up with a UV here, see what it looks like. But I found that this is particularly strong and also very even. So, you know, you can see it glowing here a bit. But what I really like is that the different elements all pretty much glow the same brightness, which, you know, when you make a watch like this, things are going to be coming from different manufacturers. So your hands are from one person, your applied numeral, etc. So to get them all nice and even and match is you know, just a really nice touch. Once again, fantastic at the price point. Both the Contrail and the Contrail 39 come on a bracelet. It's an H-link bracelet with a brushed top surface. It tapers a little bit, so it's 20 at the lugs, probably about 18 at the buckle, at the clasp. But you have this really massive clasp here, which is has a nice solid feel to it. It's not one of those kind of cheap stamped clasps. It obviously has some finishing to it as well. There's some polish, some brushing. There's it's kind of a safety clasp there, and then you push the buttons to open it. The safety clasp, I feel like it wants to sit a little bit flatter. It pops up a little bit. So that's just the one thing I noticed, that it's not the end of the world at all, but it kind of just felt like that wants to be a tiny bit tighter. That could just be literally the tolerances on this one. One thing I really liked about it is it has 6 positions of micro adjustment on it. And why I like that is because when I adjust a bracelet, I basically by default always remove 4 links, and that'll get me close, but it's never quite there. So with this one, I did that, and it was still too big. So I moved it in micro adjustment until it fit perfectly. And now this is really perfect for my wrist. It's got enough space that it's not too tight, but it's not loose at all. It's not moving around on its own. So I find that very comfortable. And often I can't get bracelets right to that sweet spot. So kudos to them for having the micro adjustment. Another great feature is that this is a bracelet with single-side screws. So they go, you know, through one side. They're super easy to change. It's effortless to change the links on this bracelet. So just, you know, you probably have a screwdriver at home already that'll do the job. Finishing on this is really nice. I like that they went with the H-link. You know, you don't see that very often. I always think Sin when I think H-link, but this doesn't look like their H-link. It flexes very nicely without looking, you know, like a mesh or a Jubilee kind of bracelet. I feel like, or a 5-link. You know, sometimes when you get those sometimes when you get the fussier bracelets, they actually feel a little bit better because there's so many little pieces that they drape. This drapes really nicely while having that kind of substantial, almost oyster look to it. So I definitely like that they went with this. My only gripe on this part is that the end link could be finished a little bit better. And I think, you know, by having such a nicely finished case, the end link kind of jumps out as having a little bit of a less quality to it, you know. And it's really subtle. You really have to look hard at it, but you know, just the way it lines up underneath, the sides aren't quite even. There's a little bit more of a gap on one side than other, etc. So that was just something that stood out to me. But once again, when you're actually just wearing it, looking at it on the wrist, you're not going to see that stuff. You really have to kind of focus in. Looking at just the Contrail 39 now, we put this on one of our natural Model 2 premiums just to show you what it looks like on leather. This is definitely a watch I'd wear on leather as well, but it does come with the bracelet. So you get it on the bracelet that we just saw on the other watch. Because it's a shorter lug to lug, it's going to hold straps in really tight. So you're getting a little bit of rub here. Something we found that is actually a really great way to solve that problem is simply getting bent spring bars, which you can, you know, order online from various places. That actually gives you enough room usually that you won't have this issue. But just looking at the watch, you know, on a leather strap, I think it takes very well to it. That adds, you know, once again, even more casual, kind of rugged vibe. In this style of strap, kind of a vintage style of strap, obviously works with the design elements that they have going on here as well. So, you know, I think that's just so you know in your mind what that will look like, that it works very well. Just quickly getting into the fit of the watch, you know, as expected, a 39 or 40.5 millimeter watch with shorter 47 millimeter lugs is going to fit very nicely. You know, I have a 7-inch wrist just about. I think this looks fantastic on my wrist. It's been very comfortable to wear. So really, I think they nailed that size. This really is a sweet spot, I think, for kind of an everyday sport watch. It's funny, a few years ago, seeing a 39 millimeter watch, I would have been like, oh my God, they finally made a small watch. This feels so totally normal now, which I think really says a lot about how big watches had gotten. So I think, I'm really glad to see that Nodus stayed with that kind of classic size, or what I'd say to me is a modern classic size, 38, 39, 40, perfect for everyday comfort, which they really nailed here. And knowing this is 200 meters, knowing, this is really a watch you don't need to take off no matter what you're doing. And, I think that was their goal, and they achieved it. So yeah, just, to kind of wrap things up, I think Nodus really kind of hit their stride here with the Contrail. My personal preference is for the bezeled model because of the added functionality of having this 12-hour bezel. Really, I just find it very useful, particularly when I'm traveling. But then it has just a really nice look to it. At the price point of $599 with the Miyota 9015 that is regulated in-house by them in Los Angeles, I think this is an incredible value. And yeah, I think they just did a great job. So if you're looking for kind of like an everyday go-to sport watch, sort of travel watch, definitely take a look at the Contrail.